Doctor. Yes, please. All right. Welcome everyone to another edition of the forecast, Subseasonal Forecast Contest. My name is David Margolin. It is May 18th, and we were just saying that this is our last HDD forecast verification. So going forward here, it'll all be CDDs. So yeah, let's start there. So we'll start with the just looking back at the most recent forecast, and we can also look back at the HDD season as for a little bit too. I know we've talked a lot about how the CFS has performed to the EC, so we can take a final look at that. And then we can talk about the current forecast, which I mentioned just before the start of the recording. Again, as someone who I don't look at the forecasts as much as some other folks who are looking at it on an intraday basis. But what it feels to me is that over the last week, we've seen a pretty significant shift from, hey, are we ever going to get out of this kind of coolish pattern, normal pattern, to now looking more like maybe how things, what you might expect based on the last 10, 15 years of transitions into the cooling season, where things just seem to be hot most of the time or anomalously warm most of the time. So we'll talk about that in a second. Any other hot topics though that folks want to, no pun intended, I guess, but if folks want to talk about today?
This is just a bookkeeping thing, but I've noticed the MJO analog wasn't in this particular forecast. Is there the one that verified most recently, right? So,
oh yeah,
there were two forecast periods over the heating season that there was no MJO forecast. I'm just curious why that.
Yeah, if it wasn't in there, I know. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There were a couple technical issues. So it was probably, if it's not in this one, it was probably a technical issue. I can't remember exactly, but I'm sure that was the reason. But in speaking of that, like looking at today's forecast, there's still a couple technical issues here. You can see that the MJO is fine, actually. The MJO forecast is fine today. But the spread values on persistence are, wrong, the zeros. And it's also wrong on the normal and the 30-year, which is zero. The forecasts for the means, those are correct. I double checked them to what's on the Maxar website, 30 for normal and 30 for the 30-year normal, and then 34 for the 10-year normal. I checked that over here. So those match up. But yeah, so hopefully I'll get this all resolved by next week. But to your question, Dr. Decker, yeah, I think it was a technical problem that I don't think should be ongoing. Right. All right. Anything else that you guys want to talk about today? Or if anything comes up, just, keep it informal today. All right. So yeah, so we were just talking about this week's verification. So again, this is from April 27th, forecast made from April 27th for middle of May here. And again, it was the last of our HDD forecast. And yeah, it was tough for a lot of us, not all of us. Matt Rogers scored quite well here. The verification was around 28 HDDs. You can see it down here. The 30-year normal is about 26.4. The 10-year normal about 23. So those are kind of your benchmarks. So it finished, this was sort of the getting toward the end of that anomalously cool pattern that we had here for a while that it felt some ways like it would never end. But, so we actually had HDDs that were above the 30-year. And in terms of human forecasters, I think Matt was the only one who, did a good job in catching on to that. And then obviously we had some forecasters here that, a lot of us were thinking that, HDDs were going to be well below normal at that point. I was thinking here before we open up, let's just see what I was looking at like the EC and CFS. So we have the CFS, which did, was on the top half of performance. It still wasn't better than normal, but it scored a -22, and then the EC was quite a bit warmer, and so that put a dent in its performance. Let's look at the temperature patterns. Hopefully we have it good, versus verification. So that's the CFS, and let me pull up the verification. Yeah, it was over here. Just put it next to it, I guess, and we can just talk. Oh, I'll go back and forth or whatever. Make sure I got the dates pretty close. Yeah, so again, we said this was for the 12th through 16th, and the closest CFS we had was 13th through 18th. So it's not perfect, but it's close in terms of dates. And then let's pull up the EC. Yeah, that's problematic. Yeah, so sometimes we have to talk about how sometimes the pattern's okay. It's just that it's just something in the details or the way it interpolates to the surface or something like that. But not the case, I think, with the EC this time, right? I mean, this is just a bad pattern. This is not a good pattern match, no matter how you look at it. Like the strongest aboves, warmest anomalies more toward the southern and southeastern half of the country, arcing from Texas across the southeast into New England, with normals to kind of blows further north and west. And that's basically almost 180 degrees, not quite. New England was a little bit warm here, but lots of cool anomalies from Texas across the eastern, most of the east south of New England, and lots of warmth in the northwest. So certainly it didn't catch a pattern. Let's look real quick too. Just curious. Let's look at the 500. I'll do global. I mean, we can do both, but let's start with the global. So I'll pull up the globals. There's the EC global, which looks like that, CFS, and then let's pull it up on Dynacast. So what is a global? 500. Let's see what this looks like. Okay. 12 through 16. Move that over a little bit. So, yeah. So maybe this is a good time to open it up. I'll just say that I know for a couple weeks here, and I can see it a little bit in maybe I'll switch to the hemispheric view, but it does look like there was at least remnants of this NAO feature sliding west, maybe, that the models, in particular, I should say, maybe the EC did not capture well. Now, I don't know how much of this that explains, but certainly it had, more above normal heights across Greenland, and that certainly was not the case. The pattern across the Pacific, I feel like, is a little bit more complicated at first glance. I mean, I'm just glancing at this thing, but it's certainly not perfect. But I'm not sure I would call it, 180-degree miss or something like that. There was East Pacific ridging. The European was showing East Pacific ridging, but it also extended into, the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia and such like that. So those are the first two things that I guess jump out to me, that probably the biggest, if I, subjectively or qualitatively kind of looking at this, the miss across the North Atlantic, and then maybe below that, in terms of importance, not configuring the ridging across the East Pac / Western North America, as well as what was observed. But let me open it up, and do other folks have some thoughts here? Maybe Dave, or in terms of what happened here and why the models, in particular the EC, did not capture well this cold pattern?
Actually, could I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I thought I saw maybe the CFS had that cutoff low near Hawaii. I assume that's a cutoff low in that. Yeah, so it's not quite in the right place, but I don't know if that has any downstream impact. But the CFS has the ridge and the low, whereas the European just had the ridge, right? Without that little blue spot, it's not in the right place. It's west of Hawaii instead of east of Hawaii, but it's absent completely in the EC, but it's there in the observed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like I did a disservice a little bit to the CFS. I was kind of focused on the EC miss, but I think you can make a case here, as Dr. Decker, I think you were alluding to, that the CFS did a better, like maybe it was one of these broken clock type things, but the CFS did capture that feature, and when you look across the North Atlantic. At least it had a little bit more of a signature here of some ridging kind of coming across into Eastern Canada, which, and it was hinting at this sort of suppressed an opportunity for cool into the Northeast or what eastern parts of the country. So I don't know. I might be using a little bit of Monday morning quarterback here on that feature, but I agree with you completely in the Pacific. Clearly, it did capture that feature north of Hawaii, which maybe is also part of the reason. It seems logical to me that would also then support more ridging extending into Western North America, which, all things being equal, is going to be a cooler signal for the United States. Any other thoughts on this?
Dave, can you hear me? Am I on?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that was a great observation by Michael. It's really, I think that's kind of an insightful view there on what that cutoff low east of Hawaii helped to do. There's an old forecaster rule of thumb. And by that, I mean like forecast rule of thumbs going back to like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Back in the day when we really only saw model forecasts go out, 3 days at best. And one of the rules of thumb was trough near or east of Hawaii, big trough, East Coast US. So in this case, that old rule of thumb worked out. Now, seeing that in the modeling is an entirely different story. Clearly, that CFS saw some semblance of a subtropical cutoff. And subtropical cutoffs in spring and fall are particularly troublesome, as I think we've seen for most of our verification this week. I think there's probably some interplay with subtropical cutoffs and kind of macro-ish tropical activity. And in this case, a lot of the tropical activity was centered. I mean, the Wheeler-Hendon kind of had it in like, I think we're phase 2. But it's a little bit misleading in my view, because we were probably phase 2, borderline phase 3 for this verification, which is kind of like Central East Indian Ocean. But when you kind of get a better view of the entire tropics through looking at something like 200 millibar velocity potential, there was convection centered in phase 2, phase 3. There was also some elements of convection that were kind of threading out across the tropical Pacific towards the dateline, which have been more like phases like 5, 6, and 7. So there's a little bit of a confused tropical look verifying in this period. I'm not saying that is entirely the culprit behind the very cold look in the east, but it seems like this was kind of like the really great last gasp of a kind of a colder North America pattern that we've kind of been oscillating back and forth with since March. But I don't know what made this one much more pronounced. But Michael's view of the cutoff on Hawaii was a nice observation. Identifying this in modeling, though, was a real challenge. as our verification just demonstrates.
Let's see here. That was actually Dr. Decker who made that up.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry.
Let's see here.
No problem.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying. Yeah, because what was it last week when we did this? Right, we had yeah. It was, so I was just looking at last week's verification, right, and that's right. We were also yeah quite on the cool side, 46. And the 30-year was 33, and then I think it was the week before that where yeah it came in quite a bit lower than expected. It was bouncing back and forth a little bit, but yeah, this is definitely, it seems like the tail end here of this this cooler pattern here. And just let me just go back. I just curious about the atmospheric view, and then we can go back like 5 days here if I do this thing. I think is it 5 days? Yeah. Yeah, and I remember, oh yeah, look there, you really see the negative NAO. This is going back now 10 days. So I'm going in 5-day blocks. So May 2nd to May 6th, and I'll go forward. May 7th to May 11th. And then, yeah, I mean, you could definitely argue, and I think we said this last week. Let's just look at this one more time. But I think the EC did a pretty bad job of capturing that NAO from last week, right? Just double check. Yeah, yeah. So that's May 5th. So you know, it's kind of a snowball effect, right? You know, once you, especially, I guess with with any maybe high latitude feature, but in particular, like with an NAO, that can cause damage to a forecast for multiple periods, just like it did here with the EC, because obviously the EC missed the development of the NAO, and if you get a big enough NAO, they tend to have some persistence, but even more than that, right? They get big enough, right? It's the the Ross wave gets big enough, it tends to retrograde. And when they come west and kind of then slowly weaken, like this feature kind of did over the last couple weeks, then it can continue to have in particular across the United States, it can really have lingering effects, right? Because I always thought, like, this is my rule of thumb with Greenland blocks or NAO blocks, is when they're eastward based, you can still, it can be, you're going to get crushed in Europe in terms of cold, but it can be very dicey in the United States if it's more of an eastward based NAO. But once it starts coming across the Davis Straits, forget about it. It's going to be, higher probability it's going to be cold in the United States, because there's just almost no way to get away from the fact that jet stream is going to get sandwiched into the eastern half. That's just my little rule of thumb. But all right, so let's see. Let's just look at one other thing here. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah, Dr. Decker was saying we didn't have. I was going to say the MJO. Be interesting to see if there were any other clues on this forecast. All right, let's look at the HDD, and I think I cheated and I looked at this earlier. Oh, okay. So this is like going to be our final tally, and I think the CFS did finish. Yeah. So in our final tally here for the season, the CFS did finish in terms of our primary performance metric, the CRPS, ahead of the EC. So across 30 forecasts from this heating season, it finished at like a -5, and the EC was closer to -13. In terms of directional hit rate, I think the CFS, right? Okay, so the CFS also beat, not by a lot, but the CFS directionally was correct, almost 67% of the time, and the EC was closer to 63. So, no matter how you slice it, the CFS in our sample, right? Because we don't include both EC forecast here. We don't include the EC from Thursday, but at least from the looking at all the EC forecast based on Tuesday and comparing to the CFS won for the first time. So it'll be, I think it'll be interesting, obviously it'll be interesting to see if we carry that forward into the summer, or if that was more a relic of, heating season slash, just a good string of things. Just see, I'm just curious too, just in terms of directional. This is my first time kind of looking at some of the final tallies here, but I'm just kind of saying, Michael, looks like you did quite well here in terms of, I was just looking at the directional hit rate here, and it looks like you were the highest for any forecaster or forecast with 20 or more forecasts. Looks like you had the highest directional hit rate at 78. So kudos there. And
He's
then,
highest for performance too, the CRPS.
oh yeah. All right. Let's do that. All right. So I just switched it to, yeah, there's Michael.
Highest human, that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I managed a 0. That's kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. But no, that's great though. I mean, and the directional hit rate there, I mean, put this in perspective. Let's see, I'm above the 60 line, so I got a D. Is that a D? No, but yeah, I mean, 60.7. I mean, some all-stars here. Paul Roundy at 62. Dr. Decker, 64. Philip, who I think just joined us, did get over the 70% line. So that's good. And there's Michael.
I should caveat it with I did miss a couple of particularly poor forecasts for a couple of weeks. Can't remember which ones specifically, but I remember the verifications were not pretty.
Right. Well, hey, it happens to all of us. Oh, and sorry, I missed Dave. Dave beat me at 63, a strong 63. And so I don't feel so bad because Matt Rogers, I can make fun of him because he's not on the line. Matt Rogers finished at 52. So, well, at least he beat, he was on the right side of normal. So that's good, right?
Well, Dave, just hold on a second while I cancel my contract with Matt.
And here, yeah, and Maxar comes in industry number 1. That's our Maxar at 70. So good showing there for Maxar at 70. I think anyone over 70, give yourself a pat on the back. There's not too many of those forecasts. There's like 3 forecasters here. So
I will say there's kind of no, I'm not trying to pick on Matt. I mean, I go way back. We were classmates as undergrads. I think Matt's a very good forecaster. This was, well, not kind of trying to comment on winter, but in the industry, there's kind of a generally accepted benchmark of around 60% for this kind of week 3, which is considered kind of quote unquote skillful. But Dave, you probably appreciate this as well. There's this view, which is that the stats are very important to keep. But then there's the underlying question of not just count, because I think, when you do this every day, your count gets into the hundreds over the course of a season. You're probably issuing multiple forecasts a day. And so there's a lot of benchmarks. And then obviously you want to be able to hopefully get the biggest ones more correct than others. There are some that are more important. And here, we have no ability to kind of weight that. But it's a fun game. And I like it when you do it over the course of a season and you get to see, anyone who's in that 70%, that's really a phenomenal number, no matter the winter, right? Because every winter is going to throw you, hot and cold streaks. This winter was a challenging one. I think it was maybe a little bit more challenging than the previous few. But yeah, anyone who's kind of in that 70 number is really a credit to some good forecasting. Yeah, I agree. And right. And it's a good point too. It'd be,
maybe at some point, right, we can try to look at some of those. It would be great. It would be great to have a little bit more market information embedded in here so that, let's say we had, I don't know, the top X forecasts that move the market, you know, uh, things like that, maybe during pattern transitions and stuff like that. And then we could have a separate score to say, yeah, who did, how did folks score in capturing those important pattern transitions or important market movers and things like that. That'd be a cool thing to kind of look at in the future.
Yeah,
There's just- yeah.
This one's tough. I like this forecast, but it's challenging because we're taking one snapshot in time. And market moves typically don't happen just on kind of like a one-time deal, right? There's like an unfolding story that happens over the course of several days or even several weeks at times. So I think it's a little bit unfair. And that's why I'd give Matt, like, obviously a huge benefit of the doubt because, Matt's making this prediction as a one-shot deal on a Tuesday. One thing we look at here internally is we look at kind of like the evolution of forecasts and forecast risks over multiple days. So I was looking back at the forecast that we made on the 27th of April, which I think was when this one was made, that we're verifying these mostly crappy numbers for. And we were really missed the mark, for the balance of that week, right? I'm looking at that entire week, Monday through Friday. We were really weren't changing our tone very much in terms of, we were leaning pretty warm. And, I think that we will track our evolution of forecast rather than just take the snapshot. In both cases, in my predictions were pretty poor. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, you talk about market information, and the market will include multiple forecasts over multiple days to kind of gauge a trend or a pattern.
It really, yeah. I mean, just since we're goofballing a little bit today, I was thinking about, I was watching, so I get a couple different vendor reports. I won't name the vendor, but I was they put out like a month numbers like for CDDs and HDDs for every month, and I was just tracking like their May. They always put out their May every day. And it reminds me, seeing the evolution of their May forecast reminds me of how difficult, like what Dave was saying, the psychology of this, it can really beat you to death. It's like, from like 3-4 weeks ago, I was watching it and just, and they'd say stuff like, yeah, we know May's coming in a little bit cool, but, we have strong confidence that the end of May is going to be warm. So, we're not going to change our number. And they did this for like 10 days. So like, I was reading it, like it was coming in cool, late April and stuff like that. We were, how these forecasts were evolving. We're seeing all these cool periods, but don't worry, it's going to get warm and stuff. And then finally, 10, 15 days ago or 10 days ago, they started, okay, we're capitulating. We're bringing down our May number and all this kind of thing. And then, of course, in the last 5 days or 6 days, all these 6 to 10 day forecasts have kind of come back up, and so then I see them starting to bump it up, and I was just reminded of how, it's when you're making a forecast once a week or whatever, you don't have to deal with that beating. Like it's hard on you. It's to come in and it's like, all right, finally I'm going to change my forecast. I'm going to go colder or warmer for the month ahead or for the 16 to 20 because there's so much data and I can't fight it anymore, right? And then boom, things start to go the other way and you're like, oh my God, did I make the right move? Should I have done it? All this kind of stuff. So maybe I need a couch to lay on right now because now I feel like I need a therapist.
Oh, Dave, it's brutal. I mean, you've been there. I'm there all the time. It's, you got to have I always feel like you have to have a closer's mentality. If anyone really is a baseball fan,
right.
This game requires a true closer's mentality, which is like, you got to learn from your past, but you got to shake it off too. And
right.
You got to go out and take the ball the next day and fire the same pitches. And so that I think that kind of mentality is pretty critical on a kind of a grinding it out day-to-day basis. But yeah, to be fair, there was forecasts that were coming out in late April from really well-respected vendors that were going to put May CDDs in kind of like a top 3 all time. We saw the May actually began on a rather hot note in the East. Well, I shouldn't say hot, above normal note in the East. The first 6 or 7 days of the month were pretty warm in the East, and that faded and it got very cold. And here we are, starting really today, flipping back to the hotter side. It's not going to finish nearly in the top 3 CDDs. Doesn't matter how hot it gets this next, 12 or 13 days, but it's really been a tough road for those guys that were going like all time or close to all time hottest May.
Right.
This was it's a real kick in the pants here.
Yeah. It's been a roller coaster, right?
Yeah, I will say, so I wanted to point out too, we look at the world in energy space less from a CDD perspective, because those can be misleading, and we look at it much more from a demand perspective. So natural gas demand is related to heating load. So, most people in this country heat their homes with natural gas. Natural gas is used in a lot of cases to produce electricity, but we look at natural gas demand in the cold season. And so this, because it's a cold verification, it's worth taking a look at, I think, natural gas demand. And despite how cold it was, if you can put up the verification, Dave, kind of give you a pretty good indication, as despite how cold it was and how many quote unquote HDDs we were accumulating in this period, or do you have a map, Dave, just of the temperature departure from normal? I looked at natural gas demand for this period, and natural gas demand nationally was only running about 2%, barely 2% above normal for the May 12 through 16 period. So it shows you how inconsequential it really was. That cold anomaly, honestly, for the southern 4/5 of that cold batch, anything really south of the Ohio River, nobody was out, as cold as it was in like the Carolinas and Georgia, there really was only tiny amounts of heat being turned on. And the energy market was able to shrug this off because, in mid-May, you really should be like turning on quite a bit of air conditioning load in the southern third of the country. And it was so cold that you didn't have any air conditioning load, but it wasn't cold enough to have heating load, right? These were really pleasant days in the South. I think anyone in Georgia is probably thrilled to have a 8-degree departure from normal in mid-May, so you can cut the humidity, and nights might be in the 40s, but you really might be running very little to no demand heating load, because you've got days in the 60s and 70s, the sun is out, and it's just this is a really pleasant, in a real field perspective. The southern half of that cold area is just getting pleasant territory, and I was running a little heat here in Pennsylvania, but it was turning on for an hour or two in the morning and then nothing the rest of the day. And most days the windows were open in the afternoon, the back door was open. It was nice. So, we were able to kind of shake this off from an energy market perspective, which is kind of what I was like, oh, these minus 300s look ugly. But from a market perspective, the real focus here is already turning towards like this hot stretch in the Midwest and Northeast, East Mid-Atlantic for the next, 10 days or so.
Yeah. So that's maybe a good segue. Let's look at the forecast here in our remaining time. And so let's see. I'm just curious too, as we will, so this was our verification from this week. Let's see, because next week seems interesting. Like what's the estimate right now? So what's that, like 19th?
Yeah, it'll be the 19th to the 23rd, right?
All right, so let's see what Maxar is projecting so far. Let's see what the map looks like. Whoa. Yeah, it's a little bit different. And so CDDs, right? Yep. So 29, 30, there's the 10-year, there's the 30-year. So well above even the 10-year. Let's see. It was right, 30-year. Where's the 30? Yeah, so this will be interesting. The CFS is not going to, yeah. We'll see. CFS, I don't think it's going to get off to a good start for the cooling season here, but we'll see. All right, let's go to let's go to the current forecast. So, all right, so this is our current forecast. Let's see what kind of distribution we have here. On the warm side, we have, I guess the 5-year moving average is 38, and human forecasters, it looks like Dave and Michael are near the top, around 35, 36. And let's see, on the cool side, Josh Herman, it'd be interesting to have his views on this. And of course, we have persistence. And, I did a double check on some of these persistence numbers thinking, well, is that right? Like maybe there's a problem. But no, it's kind of what Dave was just saying. Persistence, it's just a simple calculation. So it just says, how did the last 5 days of verification compare to historical normals? And the last 5 days, came in, in terms of, HDD, CDDs, like well below normal. I mean, it was, like we said, it was cool in the South and stuff like that. So it was very much lower than expectations in terms of CDDs or what have you. So obviously, if you're going with persistence, you're going to have a very low number, but that doesn't look too. It's a little extreme. Who wants to? And then just a benchmark here: the 10-year is 34 or 34 and a half ish, and the 30-year is 30. And Maxar is about 32 or 33. So who wants to kick us off and tell us about their forecast?
I guess I could start since mine's usually the simplest, just looking at the CPC forecasts. And it's fairly warm, but not with huge probabilities. And the highest probabilities are there's, aside from Phoenix, not a lot of cooling demand, I don't think. So I did go above normal, as you would expect with that kind of forecast, but the Gulf Coast is equal chances. So I didn't go too far above normal for my forecast. And they also mentioned, so I lowered my sigma sub because in the discussion, they said there was a lot of agreement in the various tools that the CPC looks at least as of May 14th, when they made this forecast.
I was going to say that's interesting because I believe I was reading from one group today that Dave can talk more about this, but that there was not great agreement, at least in the 11 to 15, in the in the pattern, in the temperature /500. Let's just take a look real quick. So obviously we're talking 16 to 20, but to get there, you have to get through the 11 to 15, right? And here's the EC ensemble 11 to 15, and then there's the GFS. Let's look at it in terms of 500 real quick. There's the GFS, and there's the EC. So yeah, definitely some differences there. This is a little more Mickey Mouse, maybe a little less Mickey Mouse. All right. Okay. Who would like to go next? Michael, do you want to, since you were the winner chicken dinner of the heating season, what's going to happen in the CDD season?
Well, I don't know if I'll be that as good in the cooling season, but we'll see. So yeah, I went with 34.9. I'm on the warmer side. The CPC was pretty gung ho on the warm, as Dr. Decker already mentioned. Not as high with their probabilities of warmth, but it was a pretty broad painted warm picture. So I went with a kind of a more broad look of warmth, as you can see from my forecast map. Kind of took into account that they're not as confident on the warmth in the east and around the Chicago area, so I didn't put them above normal, just as a precaution. And then the teleconnections all seem to be reversing their pattern that they've been in for the past month and a half or so. So I kind of went with a warmer pattern there, since the teleconnections in their current configuration have been cooler for overall for CDDs. So that's my 2 cents. Any comments, complaints, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll play the role of a little bit, trying to be a little bit jerky. Um, I was trying to think like what traders might ask Dave, like, what do you mean by teleconnections reversing? You mean that the NAO block or ridging that we were just talking about is weakening, and that the fact that it's weakening should facilitate a warmer pattern? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, when I was scrolling through, the P&A has been pretty negative overall, excluding a period in looks like around May 10th-ish. And looks to be heading back towards a more positive P&A. The AO it's been weekly negative for the past month or so. Looks to be popping back over to positive, although weekly positive. Not that the AO is a big player in June anyway, but still. And the NAO looks to be heading back towards positive, having been negative to slightly negative for the past month or so. So with a kind of a reversal of those signals, I kind of figured that, we have a reversal. It was cold with that pattern. It would probably be warm or with the reverse pattern in place.
Okay, I guess yeah, I'm just trying to think if I was making $1 million decisions off of this. It's I guess I don't know exactly. I guess two thoughts come to mind. Like one, so the P&A was negative and it's going neutral, and so that's part of the reason why you would expect warmer. Like it almost seems like opposite, like a negative P&A, right? You're going to have more ridging across the southeast and stuff, and especially at this time of year where that could be hotter. On the other hand, with the P&A, like I like this little chart here, it shows correlations. We also know that the correlations kind of weaken as you get toward the summer, so that P&A becomes less of an influence. So I guess I wonder how much is that an independent data point from the models, and also just how, frankly, how factual is that a negative P&A going to neutral would, all things being equal, support higher CDDs?
Well, you'll also see that I factored that in as well, and only raised my value by half of a CDD based on those teleconnections. So warmer, but not like a lot warmer, if that makes sense.
I still don't necessarily agree, but I think we could just leave it there, unless anyone else has any thoughts. I don't see exactly why a negative P&A weakening is a sign that you should go warmer. It's just not, it's not clear to me the way you've spelled it out exactly. And I might be missing something. Otherwise you can just chalk it up to me being jerky. But just something to think about. And my larger point here is that you're going to have tough audiences, right? You're going to have much tougher audiences than me, and so you just want to make sure, that you can back it up either through empirical data, or if it's not empirical and if it's just more, hey, experiential slash gut feeling, that you separate the two. And I'm not saying it is. And maybe there is a relationship here that I don't fully get. But if I were making $1 million decisions, if I was a trader and you were telling me this, I'd really want to make sure that I understand that if it is really an empirical relationship, I'd want to understand it better than I do right now. Or if it is more just, hey, Michael's a great forecaster, he's got a great track record, he's just got instincts for these things. I just want to be clear that that's where it's coming from, one versus the other, and just so I know, so I can incorporate that into my ultimate process to say, all right, yes, I'm going to go with Michael's forecast because you know, I believe what he's saying is right. Versus, I'm not sure I believe it because I just don't know if there's enough there, kind of thing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. The only thing I can offer for further explanation is that we were in a cold pattern with the current configuration of teleconnections, right? Or cooler, maybe not necessarily cold, but cooler for sure. So my thought process with looking at kind of a reversal of teleconnections in spite of the signal not being, as strong in the summer months was that if the signal reverses from, what we have now to something, we go from negative PNA, AO, and NAO to positive to slightly positive states of all three of those teleconnections, then we would kind of see a less cool pattern just from, if we switch the pattern to, I could be dead wrong, but my 2 cents is that if we switch the pattern from the current state of teleconnections to the opposite signal, basically, that we should see warm or instead of cooler.
Yeah,
I don't know if that made sense.
I think that makes more sense. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think saying something, I'll just put in my own words. I think what you're saying, regardless of what I just think I understand the logic of this more. If you're, regardless if I agree or disagree with the actual, relationships or inputs to the forecast. But if you're saying that, hey, the PNA, NAO, and whatever, PNA and NAO were the primary contributors to the cold forecast, and they're I'm confident that they're switching signs in the next 2 weeks, then I get it. You're saying they were primary contributors to cold in their current phase. They're switching to the opposite phase. That to me seems like that's another good indicator that this is going to be a warmer pattern. I think that's to me a more clear way to explain it. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Any other questions for Michael? All right. Phil, did you want to go through your forecast process?
Sure, you might need to refresh that to see my forecast.
See, what Philip does is he waits until all the great forecasters on the line put in their forecasts. And then he takes all of our information, puts it in his forecast, and that's why he always scores better. No, I'm just kidding. All right, go ahead.
That Dave, real quick, that's proper game theory right there. That is in any contest that there's multiple forecasters and lots of data sources, then that's the right play. No doubt.
Anyway, all right, I guess I'll start with my forecast. As you know, I also use the teleconnections and the CPC. So as was mentioned, the CPC is very warm, and we see, however, that most of the warmth is in the northern 2/3 of the country and also in the west. And then for the teleconnections, as was mentioned, it seems like there's a bit of a reversal of the signals. In particular, I note that the AO is heading towards neutral and the NAO moving towards positive. And as was also mentioned, the PNA is moving towards neutral. And EPO looks like it's an uncertain neutral, but not a very confident forecast from the models there. And then looking at the tropics, I noted that the MJO signal is currently sitting in phase 3, but it has, as was also mentioned in the CPC discussion, it made this weird loop because of some interference with another wave, convectively coupled Kelvin wave, I believe. And the models generally forecast the signal to move towards 6 and 7. So I used 7 for my when I was using the MJO signal, which actually turns out to be a cool signal in the east, but a warm signal in the west. So sort of similar to what we see in that CPC forecast, and is also somewhat consistent with the MJO analog, although our analog is not a very strong signal for this time. And then the La Nina has basically weakened. It's fairly close to neutral with slightly cool anomalies. So overall, I treated the tropics as a slightly warm signal when putting all these things together, with noting some uncertainty in the evolution of the MJO. So overall, my numbers ended up on the warm side of 32, and confidence is near average with most indicators other than the tropics suggesting warmth.
It's interesting you brought up the let's MJO. Let's look at the this guy real quick. It was on the warmer side, right? And I was just thinking about some of the points you made about phase 6 and 7. So what is it? It's like, somewhere around here. Yeah, it's interesting. So we're kind of, so this is, I'm looking at the 16 to 20 day lag, right? And you said we're, we're
Just
showing-
into phase 3, but not very strong in phase 3.
right.
So
Right.
it
So
looks
we're,
like it's
what's that?
just into the orange, not quite the orange dot there.
Yeah. Yeah, somewhere around there. And then, or if let's just say you look at it more contemporaneously, so that in June, yeah, we're going to be somewhere in the 6-7-ish,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, it's kind of on the fence, I guess, either way you look at it. Like if the phase 6-7 ends up being a little bit stronger, I think, yeah, you feel like there's probably a better chance for cool.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess that's maybe staying the opposite. And let's see. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit, just see how stable this is. Okay, looks like the signal as you get deeper into the summer. Here's June 1st ish, June 10th, June 20, June 3rd, or July 1st. That signal around 6-7 definitely amplifies. It seems like it really gets its act together. So it'd be interesting. It would be interesting a little bit to see. But yeah, I mean, if it comes in this week, yeah, it's, yeah, it's the devil's in the details. I think
Yeah.
these things, but yeah, I almost think what you like. It's the bottom line. Maybe it's just not a super clear signal at this point, or a clear signal. On the other hand, if someone out there has confidence, someone who studies these things a lot and says, you know what, I think the models are missing the fact that this is going to be a much stronger phase 6-7 or a much weaker phase 6-7, or however you want to look at it, then you might be able to hedge against models, right? That's what you can do. Personally, I don't, but it seems like it could be pretty important here to whether or not the models actually get this right or not in terms of maybe what the forecast outcome turns out to be here as we get into into June a little bit.
Then I forgot to mention, but for the models, I have also been trying the thing that we started last summer of adding 9 to the CFS CDDs. That gave me a rather large number of about 37.7, which seemed really high to me. But when I put it in my forecast, I guess since I'm only weighting at 5%, it's not making a big difference.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is that so going back to last year? Yeah, the CFS bias for the year was minus 9.5 or so. Okay, yeah, that'll be interesting to watch, right? To see if we see that that kind of correction again.
And at least with that first period, as we mentioned, the CFS is coming in very cold, so there's a possibility.
Yes, barring a big pattern flip here, it looks like the CFS is going to get off to a rough start here. Yeah, for sure. How about the next? Did it do better? Let's go one more week out. Just out of curious. Oof, 13.6, also at the bottom, and that's for May 26th to May 30th. Yeah, so it's looking good right now, doing that bias correction. Let's see. Yeah. So Maxar is targeting 32 almost. Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So before does anyone have any quick parting thoughts before I let everyone go? I want to be respectful to everyone's time here. We're good. All right. We spent a lot of time on attribution, but I think that was kind of fun, and there were some good things there with the end of the heating season. So thanks for everyone participating, and we'll see you guys next week.
Have a good week.
See you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.